Captain Lee Jun's eyes slowly opened as cold metal pressed against his wrists and ankles. His head felt heavy, like someone had filled it with rocks. The last thing he remembered was his ship being attacked by strange creatures with too many arms and glowing eyes. Now he found himself strapped to what looked like a massive dining table made of black stone. Strange symbols glowed along its edges, pulsing with an eerie blue light. The air smelled like burning metal and something sweet that made his stomach turn. Above him, a ceiling stretched so high he could barely see it in the dim light. Hundreds of alien creatures surrounded the table, their bug-like bodies clicking and chittering in excitement. They had long, thin limbs that bent in ways that hurt to look at, and their eyes were like black marbles reflecting the strange light. Jun tried to move, but thick metal bands held him tight. His heart started beating faster as he realized what was happening. He was dinner. A deep sound echoed through the massive hall, like someone hitting a giant bell. The chittering stopped instantly. Every creature turned toward a throne that seemed to be carved from a single piece of dark crystal. Something moved in the shadows behind the throne. Jun's breath caught in his throat as she stepped into the light. Queen Vera was unlike anything he had ever seen. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms that moved like deadly dancers. Her skin looked like polished black armor, but it seemed to breathe and shift in the light. 2 large eyes dominated her face, each one the size of Jun's fist, and they glowed with intelligence that was both beautiful and terrifying. She wore a crown that looked like it was made from the bones of creatures Jun hoped he would never meet. Her 4 hands each held different tools that gleamed wickedly sharp in the strange light. The alien creatures began chanting in their clicking language as Queen Vera walked slowly toward the table. Each step echoed through the hall like thunder. Jun could feel his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. When she reached the table, she leaned over him. Her face was close enough that he could see his reflection in her massive eyes. She raised one of her tools, and Jun could see it was some kind of knife with edges that seemed to move on their own. Then something strange happened. Queen Vera stopped moving. Her large eyes widened, and her antenna-like appendages began twitching. Rapidly. She leaned closer to Jun, so close that he could feel warmth radiating from her alien skin. She took a deep breath. The knife fell from her hand and clattered on the stone floor. The sound rang through the silent hall like a gunshot. Every creature in the room seemed to hold its breath. Queen Vera stepped back, her 4 arms trembling slightly. She looked confused, almost scared. She breathed in again, deeper this time, and her eyes began to glow brighter. When she spoke, her voice was like music played on instruments that didn't exist on Earth. The words came out in her alien language, but somehow Jun understood the meaning. It was like the words were being written directly into his mind. "This one is not food," she announced to the shocked crowd. "This one carries the scent of destiny. He will be my husband, my mate, my equal." The hall erupted into chaos as hundreds of alien voices began clicking and shrieking at once. The chaos in the Great Hall felt like standing inside a thunderstorm. Hundreds of alien voices rose and fell in angry waves, their clicking sounds mixing together into something that made Jun's teeth ache. He was still strapped to the dining table, watching this nightmare unfold around him. Queen Vera stood perfectly still in the center of it all, her 4 arms crossed over her chest. She didn't look afraid, but Jun could see tension in the way. Her antenna kept twitching. Even as powerful as she was, this situation was dangerous for her too. A figure pushed through the crowd of angry aliens. This one was different from the others. Where most of the creatures were sleek and dark, this one wore elaborate robes covered in bones and strange metal pieces that jangled when he moved. His eyes glowed red instead of the usual black, and scars covered his face like a roadmap of old battles. "High Priest Korath," someone whispered, and Jun felt his stomach drop even though he didn't know why. Korath approached the throne with slow, deliberate steps. When he spoke, his voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The hall fell silent immediately. "My queen," he said, bowing just low enough to show respect but not so low as to show weakness. "This decision brings shame to our people. For 1,000 years we have honored the sacred feast. Human flesh strengthens our warriors and pleases our ancestors." Jun tried not to think about how many humans had been eaten at these sacred feasts. His hands clenched into fists, but the metal bands holding him down didn't budge. Queen Vera's eyes flashed brighter. "I am your queen, Korath. My decisions are not questioned." "Even queens must follow the old ways," Korath replied smoothly. "The ancestors whisper their displeasure. They say this human brings weakness to our bloodline." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. June could see some of the aliens nodding their strange heads. Others looked uncertain, glancing between their queen and their high priest. "The ancestors speak only to me," Vera said, her voice growing dangerous. "And they tell me this human carries something special, something our people need." Korath smiled, showing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Then let him prove it. Let him face the trials of worth, as all potential mates must. If he survives, the ancestors will have spoken clearly. If he dies—" He shrugged, as if June's death would be nothing more than a minor inconvenience. June's blood turned to ice. He didn't know what these trials were, but from the excited clicking that started up again in the crowd, they weren't the kind of thing humans usually survived. Queen Vera was quiet for a long moment. Jun could see her thinking, weighing her options. If she refused the trials, she would look weak in front of her people. If she agreed, Jun would probably die, and she would lose whatever it was about him that had caught her attention. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. The human will face the trials, but if he succeeds, no one will question my choice again. And when he fails," Korath said with another sharp smile, "we feast as planned." The crowd erupted in cheers and excited chittering. Jun felt like he was going to be sick. Just minutes ago he had been about to be eaten alive. Now he was going to face some kind of deadly challenges that were probably designed to kill him, in even more horrible ways. Two large aliens approached the table and began undoing his restraints. As the metal bands fell away, Jun sat up slowly, his muscles cramping from being tied down for so long. "3 trials," Queen Vera said, her voice reaching him even over the noise of the crowd. "Strength, wisdom, and courage. Survive all 3, and you become my consort. Fail any one of them, and you feed my people." June looked into her strange, beautiful eyes and saw something there that gave him hope. She believed he could do this. She was betting everything on a human she had just met, risking her throne and her life on the belief that he was something special. He just hoped she was right. The arena floor felt cold under June's bare feet. They had given him simple clothes and nothing else. No weapons, no armor, just thin fabric that wouldn't protect him from a gentle breeze, let alone the claws of alien warriors. Above him, thousands of creatures filled the circular stands, their excited clicking echoing off the stone walls like rain on a metal roof. Queen Vera sat on a raised platform, her forearms gripping the sides of her throne so tightly that Jun could see the tension even from this distance. High Priest Korath stood beside her, that same nasty smile plastered across his scarred face. He was clearly expecting to watch Jun die in the next few minutes. A deep horn sounded, and 3 massive gates began to grind open on the opposite side of the arena. The crowd's excitement grew louder as heavy footsteps echoed from the dark tunnels. Beyond, Jun's mouth went dry as the first warrior emerged. The creature was easily twice his height and probably 4 times his weight. Its body was covered in natural armor that looked like polished metal, and its forearms ended in claws that could probably cut through steel. Scars covered its face and chest. This was a fighter who had survived many battles. The second warrior was even bigger, with thick legs like tree trunks and arms that hung nearly to the ground. Strange markings covered its armor, probably symbols of victories or kills. The third warrior was the most frightening of all. It moved with a grace that didn't match its size, like a predator that had perfected the art of killing. Its eyes never left Jun as it entered the arena, and there was intelligence there that made Jun's skin crawl. The horn sounded again, and the 3 warriors began walking toward him with slow, confident steps. They weren't rushing because they didn't need to. As far as they were concerned, the human was already dead. Jun's mind raced. Fighting these things directly would be suicide. He was fast, but not fast enough to avoid 6 sets of razor-sharp claws. He was smart, but that wouldn't help him if... He let them surround him. Then he noticed something interesting. The three warriors kept glancing at each other and not in a friendly way. Their body language spoke of rivalry and competition. These weren't teammates working together. They were three individual fighters who each wanted to be the one to kill the human. Jun started backing away, but not randomly. He moved in a careful pattern, staying just out of reach, while keeping all three warriors in sight. The crowd grew quieter, probably confused by why he wasn't attacking or running in panic. The first warrior, the one with the most scars, grew impatient. It charged forward with a roar that shook dust from the arena walls. Jun dove to the side. At the last second, rolling smoothly to his feet just as the second warrior's claws whistled through the air where his head had been. But instead of hitting Jun, the second warrior's claws raked across the first warrior's back. Dark blood splattered on the arena floor, and the first warrior spun around with a shriek of pain and rage. Jun kept moving, always staying just out of reach, always positioning himself so that the warriors had to get close to each other to reach him. Every time one of them attacked, he made sure another was in the way. The crowd was getting louder now, but the sounds were different. Confusion mixed with excitement as they watched their champions accidentally striking each other while trying to reach the slippery human. The third warrior, the smart one, figured out what was happening first. It tried to back away and coordinate with the others, but it was too late. The first two were already bleeding and angry, more focused on each other than on their original target. Jun waited for the perfect moment, then sprinted directly between the first two warriors just as they lunged toward him. They collided with a sound like breaking stone, their claws tearing into each other instead of empty air. The arena erupted in chaos as the crowd realized what they were watching. The human hadn't landed a single blow, but two of their greatest. Warriors were now fighting each other with desperate fury. The third warrior tried to end it quickly, leaping over its fighting companions to reach Jun, but Jun was ready. He grabbed a handful of sand from the arena floor and threw it directly into the creature's eyes, then rolled between its legs as it stumbled blindly forward. The blind warrior crashed into its two companions, turning their fight into a three-way battle. Jun stood at the edge of the chaos, breathing hard but untouched, watching as the three greatest warriors in the alien army destroyed each other in their fury to kill him. When the dust settled, all three warriors lay unconscious on the blood-stained sand. The arena was completely silent except for Jun's heavy breathing. He had won the first trial without throwing a single punch. The chamber they led Jun to was completely different from the brutal arena. This room felt ancient, like it had been carved from living rock millions of years ago. Strange blue light came from crystals embedded in the walls, casting dancing shadows that made everything look alive. In the center of the room stood something that made Jun's breath catch in his throat. It was a massive puzzle box, easily 10 feet tall and covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The thing seemed to pulse with its own inner light, and the air around it hummed with energy that made his skin tingle. Queen Vera entered behind him, along with 3 of her most trusted advisors. These weren't the bloodthirsty warriors from the arena. These aliens moved with the careful precision of scholars and thinkers. Their eyes held intelligence that rivaled anything Jun had seen on Earth. "The puzzle of ancients," Queen Vera said, her voice echoing strangely in the crystal chamber. "For 800 years our greatest minds have tried to solve it. 12 of our most brilliant scholars died attempting to unlock its secrets." One of the advisors, an elderly alien with silver markings covering his dark skin, stepped forward. "I am Kel, chief scholar of the realm. I have spent 40 years studying this puzzle. The symbols shift and change, following patterns that make no sense. Touch the wrong sequence, and the puzzle releases energy that burns the mind from within." Jun approached the puzzle slowly, his eyes taking in every detail. The symbols did seem to move when he wasn't looking directly at them, like they were alive and trying to hide from his gaze. Some looked almost familiar, reminding him of mathematical equations or star charts, while others were completely alien. "What happens if I solve it?" Jun asked. Kel's antenna twitched with what might have been amusement. "No one has ever solved it, human. The question is meaningless. But if someone did," Queen Vera answered this time, "legend says it will reveal the location of our people's lost homeworld, the world we fled from when the machines came." Jun nodded and began walking around the puzzle, studying it from every angle. The other aliens watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. To them, he was just a primitive creature from a backwards planet. What could he possibly see that their brilliant minds had missed? As Jun circled the puzzle, something began to click in his mind. The symbols weren't just random, they were telling a story, but not in the way an alien mind would expect. He had grown up reading human books, watching human movies, playing human games. His brain was wired to think in patterns that these aliens had never encountered. Where they saw chaos, he was beginning to see something else entirely. "You're thinking about this wrong," Jun said suddenly. Kel's eyes flashed with anger. "Excuse me? This isn't a puzzle in the way you understand puzzles. It's not about logic or mathematics or even ancient wisdom." Jun placed his hand on one of the symbols, and it glowed brighter under his touch. "It's a story, a children's story." The advisors began clicking their disapproval, but Queen Vera held up one of her 4 hands for silence. Jun continued, his confidence growing. "Your people think in terms of conquest and strength and complex hierarchies, but whoever made this puzzle was thinking like a human parent trying to teach their child something important." He began touching symbols in a specific sequence, not following the mathematical patterns the scholars had tried for centuries, but following the simple, emotional logic of a bedtime story. First, a symbol that looked like a rising sun, the beginning of all stories. Then a figure that reminded him of a mother holding a child, protection and love. Next, a symbol showing movement across space, the journey away from danger. The puzzle began to glow brighter with each correct touch. The alien advisors moved closer, their earlier contempt replaced by amazement and growing respect. "Impossible," Kel whispered. "The energy readings are off the charts. How are you not being burned?" Jun smiled, touching the next symbol. 1. That showed a new home being built. "Because I'm not fighting the puzzle. I'm listening to what it wants to tell me." The final symbol was the hardest to identify, but when Jun saw it, he laughed out loud. It was the simplest one of all, a symbol representing hope. The hope that someday the children would return home. As his finger touched the last symbol, the entire puzzle exploded into brilliant light. But instead of the burning energy that had killed the previous scholars, this light felt warm and welcoming. When the light faded, a 3-dimensional map hung in the air above the puzzle, showing star systems and travel routes that had been lost for generations. The chamber was completely silent except for the soft humming of the floating map. Cal was the first to speak, his voice filled with wonder and respect. "In 40 years of study, I never thought to approach it as a story. Your mind works in ways ours cannot. You have given us back our history." Queen Vera's eyes glowed with pride as she looked at Jun. "The second trial is complete." The royal breeding. Chambers lay deep beneath the palace, connected by tunnels that seemed to go down forever. As Jun descended the spiral staircase, the air grew thicker and warmer. Strange scents filled his nose, some sweet like flowers, others sharp like metal, and underneath it all something wild and dangerous. Queen Vera walked beside him, her forearms tense with worry. This was the trial she feared most, and Jun could see it in the way her antenna kept twitching. "The Guardian has killed 17 potential mates over the centuries," she said quietly. "It was created by our ancestors to ensure only the strongest could continue the royal bloodline. Even our greatest warriors fear to enter its domain." They reached a massive door made of some kind of black metal that seemed to absorb light. Ancient symbols covered its surface, but these were different from the puzzle upstairs. These symbols spoke of death and testing and blood. High Priest Korath was waiting for them, along with several other court officials. His smile was wider than ever, clearly expecting this to be where the troublesome human finally died. "The final trial," Korath announced. "Face the Guardian alone with no weapons, no assistance. Prove your worth or feed the beast. Those are the only 2 outcomes." Jun looked at the door and felt his stomach clench. Behind that metal barrier was something that had been designed specifically to kill people like him. But he had come too. Far to back down now. "How big is this thing?" he asked. "Large enough," Queen Vera replied. but size is not what makes it dangerous. The Guardian reads the mind of whoever enters. It knows your fears, your weaknesses, your every thought. It uses your own mind against you. John nodded slowly. That was actually useful information, though he wasn't sure Queen Vera realized it. The door began to grind open, revealing a chamber that was pitch black beyond the entrance. Hot air rushed out, carrying scents of something alive and hungry. "Remember," Queen Vera said, placing one of her hands on his shoulder. "The Guardian respects only dominance. Show any fear, any weakness, and it will destroy you instantly." John stepped through the doorway, and the door sealed shut behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. For a moment he stood in complete darkness, listening to his own heartbeat. Then, slowly, a dim red light began to glow from somewhere deep in the chamber, revealing the space around him. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows. The walls were covered in deep scratches, claw marks from previous battles. The floor was littered with bones that June tried not to look at too closely. A sound echoed through the chamber, something between a growl and a purr, coming from the darkness ahead. Then it appeared. The Guardian was unlike anything June had ever imagined. It stood 12 feet tall, with a body that seemed to be part cat, part reptile, and part nightmare. Its muscles rippled under scales that changed color like oil on water. 6 eyes glowed like red coals in its massive head, and when it opened, its mouth, rows of teeth gleamed like knives. But what made June's blood freeze wasn't its size or its claws or its teeth. It was the intelligence in those 6 eyes. This wasn't just a beast. It was something that could think, plan, and hate. The Guardian began to circle him slowly, its massive paws making no sound on the stone floor. John could feel it probing his mind, searching for his fears and weaknesses. Instead of fighting this mental intrusion, John did something the creature had never experienced before. He opened his mind completely, letting the Guardian see everything: his childhood, his training, his fears, his hopes, even his growing feelings for Queen Vera. The Guardian stopped circling, confused by this strange response. John began to speak, his voice calm and steady. "You're not just a weapon, are you? You're lonely. You've been down here for centuries with no one to talk to, no one who understands you. Just an endless parade of warriors who see you as nothing but an obstacle to overcome." The creature's 6 eyes blinked in surprise. "I know what that feels like," John continued, taking a step closer. "Being alone, being misunderstood, being seen as just a tool for other people's purposes." The Guardian's growl softened slightly. John kept moving closer, his movements slow and non-threatening. "You weren't created to be a mindless killer. You were made to be a judge, to test the character of those who would join the royal family. That's a huge responsibility. That's an honor." Now he was close enough to touch the creature, though he kept his hands at his sides. "You've been doing your job perfectly for centuries, protecting the bloodline, ensuring only the worthy could pass. But no one has ever thanked you for it. No one has ever recognized the burden you carry." The Guardian's red eyes were focused entirely on John now, its massive head tilted slightly as if trying to understand this strange human. "I see you," John said softly, "not as a monster or a test to be passed, but as a Guardian doing an important job, and I respect that." For a long moment, the chamber was completely silent. Then, slowly, the Guardian lowered its massive head until it was level with June's. Its 6 eyes studied his face intently, searching for any hint of deception or manipulation. Finding none, the creature took a step back and lowered itself into a position that could only be described as a bow. The trial was complete. The royal wedding was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships from 100 different worlds hung in space around the planet, their hulls gleaming like stars against the black void. Representatives from species that had been enemies for centuries sat side by side in the massive ceremony hall, all curious to witness this impossible union. John stood at the altar wearing ceremonial robes that felt heavier than his old spacesuit. The fabric was woven with threads that seemed to capture and reflect light, making him glow softly in the dim chamber. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing as he watched Queen Vera approach from the far end of the hall. She was breathtaking. Her natural armor had been polished until it shone like black diamonds, and she wore a crown that seemed to be made of captured starlight. But what struck Jun most was her eyes. They were focused entirely on him, ignoring the thousands of beings watching from the gallery above. The ceremony itself was a blend of human and alien traditions. Jun spoke vows in both languages, promising to stand beside Vera through whatever challenges lay ahead. When she replied, her words carried harmonics that made the crystal walls of the chamber sing in response. As they joined hands, his small and pale, hers large and powerful, Jun felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a political arrangement anymore. Somewhere between fighting for his life and learning to see past her frightening appearance, he had started to care about this strange, brilliant queen. The moment their union was officially declared, chaos erupted in the gallery above. A section of the viewing platform exploded in a flash of green light. Alien creatures in dark armor dropped through the opening, their weapons already firing at the altar. Jun barely had time to register the attack before Vera's forearms wrapped around him, pulling him behind the massive stone altar as energy blasts scorched the air where they had been standing. "Separatists!" Vera hissed, her voice filled with fury. "They believe our union pollutes the bloodline." More explosions echoed through the hall as the Queen's guards engaged the attackers. Jun could hear screams and the sound of weapons fire bouncing off the crystal walls. Their wedding had turned into a war zone in seconds. "Stay down," Vera commanded, but Jun was already moving. He spotted one of the attackers trying to flank their position, moving through the shadows along the wall. Without thinking, Jun grabbed a piece of broken stone from the altar and hurled it with all his strength. The rock struck the alien in the head, sending it tumbling to the floor. "I told you to stay down," Vera said, but there was pride in her voice. "I'm not hiding while people try to kill my wife," Jun replied, and he meant it. They fought back to back, Vera's natural weapons and combat training combining with Jun's quick thinking and unpredictable tactics. When an attacker came at them from above, Jun used Vera's shoulders as a springboard to leap up and tackle the creature out of the air. When another tried to surround them, Vera's forearms created a whirlwind of destruction, while Jun directed her attention to threats she couldn't see. The battle was over in minutes, but it changed everything between them. As they stood among the defeated attackers, breathing hard and covered in dust, Jun saw something new in Vera's eyes. She was looking at him not as a strange alien she had chosen to marry, but as a partner who had proven himself in the most dangerous moment of their lives. "You could have been killed," she said, one of her hands gently touching a cut on his forehead. "So could you," he replied. "We're in this together now." The weeks that followed brought more attempts on their lives. Poisoned food that Jun's human biology couldn't process anyway. Sabotaged transport ships that crashed in empty space. Even a few direct attacks by hired assassins who underestimated how deadly the Queen could be when protecting someone she cared about. But with each attack they survived together, their bond grew stronger. Jun learned to read the subtle changes in Vera's body language that warned of danger. She began to understand how his human mind could spot patterns and solutions that her alien advisors missed. They started spending their evenings together, not as political allies, but as two beings who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Vera would tell him stories of her people's history, while Jun shared tales of Earth and human culture that made her laugh with sounds like crystal bells ringing. "Never expected this," Vera admitted one night as they stood on the palace balcony, looking out at the stars. "What?" Jun asked. "To actually fall in love with you." Jun smiled, reaching up to touch one of her hands. "The feeling is mutual, Your Majesty." Their marriage had started as a bizarre twist of fate, but it was becoming something real, something worth fighting for. The first sign of trouble came at dawn when the palace guards failed to report for their morning shift. Jun was in the war room studying tactical reports when Vera burst through the doors, her forearms moving frantically as she secured weapons to her armor. "We have a problem," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "General Thax has taken control of the military compound. Half our forces have joined him." Jun felt his stomach drop. General Thax was Vera's most trusted military commander, a veteran warrior who had served the royal family for decades. If he was leading a rebellion, it meant the situation was far worse than a few scattered assassination attempts. "How many soldiers do we still have?" June asked, moving to the tactical display that showed the city layout. Maybe a third of the original force, Vera replied. The others are either with Thax or waiting to see who wins before choosing sides. Through the tall windows, Jun could see smoke rising from several parts of the city. The rebellion wasn't just military, it was spreading through the population. Citizens who had been unsure about their queen's marriage to an alien were now openly supporting those who wanted to remove her from power. They think I've grown soft, Vera continued, her antenna twitching with frustration. Thax claims that my feelings for you have made me weak, that I put the needs of one human above the strength of our people. Jun studied the tactical display, his mind racing through possibilities. Where is Thax making his stand? The Iron Fortress on the northern edge of the city. It's the strongest defensive position outside the palace itself. He's got heavy weapons, air support, and the loyalty of our best soldiers. And he's probably expecting us to either surrender or launch a direct assault, Jun said thoughtfully. Vera's eyes flashed with dangerous light. I don't surrender. And a direct assault would work if we're willing to accept massive casualties. Or we could do something he won't expect, Jun suggested. Something that proves you're not weak, but also shows that our partnership makes you stronger, not weaker. Jun pointed to the map. Thax is a traditional military thinker. He's fortified the most defensible position and is waiting for us to come to him. But he's forgotten something important. What? He's thinking like your people have always thought. But you're not just your people anymore. You're also learning to think like humans think. Vera moved closer to the display, her forearms crossing as she studied the tactical situation with new eyes. What do you see that I'm missing? Jun traced his finger along the map. The Iron Fortress is strong, but it's also isolated. Thax has pulled all his forces into one location, which means he's abandoned control of everything else. The spaceport, the communication centers, the power grid. They're all lightly defended now. You want to ignore his army and attack the infrastructure. I want to make his army irrelevant, Jun corrected. What good is the strongest fortress in the city if it has no power, no communications, and no way to get supplies? Vera's eyes began to glow brighter as she understood the strategy. We bypass his strength and attack his weaknesses. Exactly. And while small teams hit those targets, we make him think we're doing exactly what he expects. They spent the next hour planning their counterattack. Vera would lead a visible force toward the Iron Fortress, making enough noise to convince Thax that she was attempting the direct assault he expected. Meanwhile, June would coordinate strikes on the infrastructure that kept the rebellion functioning. The plan required perfect timing and a level of coordination that traditional alien military thinking couldn't achieve. But Jun had grown up playing human strategy games and watching human war movies. He understood the value of misdirection and psychological warfare. As the sun reached its peak, Vera's forces began their noisy advance toward the Iron Fortress. Thax's defenders prepared for the assault they had been expecting, consolidating their positions and bringing their heavy weapons online. They never noticed the small teams of loyal soldiers slipping through the city's underground tunnels, guided by June's tactical coordination and Vera's intimate knowledge of the palace's hidden passages. The power went out first. The Iron Fortress, along with half the city, plunged into darkness. Emergency systems kicked in, but they wouldn't last long under the energy demands of the fortress's defensive systems. Next came the communications blackout. Thax's ability to coordinate with his forces across the city disappeared in an instant. Suddenly his rebellion was just a group of isolated soldiers sitting in a dark building, cut off from the world. The final blow came when June's team secured the spaceport and the city's main supply depot. Thax's forces were now trapped with no way to resupply, no way to call for reinforcements, and no way to escape if things went badly. General Thax, Vera's voice echoed through the city's emergency broadcast system, which June's teams had also secured. You accused me of weakness. You said my marriage to a human had made me soft. Let me show you what human thinking combined with our people's strength can accomplish. From the darkness of the Iron Fortress, Thax's reply came over there. Captured communication channels. You still have to come through our defenses, Vera. We still have you outnumbered. Jun smiled as he activated the next phase of their plan. Actually, General, you're outnumbered now. Throughout the city, the soldiers who had been waiting to see who would win began switching sides. June's bloodless victory over the rebellion's infrastructure had shown them something they had never seen before. Their queen wasn't just strong, she was smart. And her human husband wasn't making her weak. He was making her more dangerous than ever. The rebellion crumbled without a single major battle. Thax surrendered when he realized his position was hopeless, and most of his followers were allowed to return to their duties after swearing new oaths of loyalty. "How you were right," Vera said as they stood together on the palace balcony, watching the city's lights come back online. "We are stronger together." Jun nodded, feeling the truth of those words. They had faced their greatest challenge not as separate individuals but as true partners. The galaxy was starting to take notice. The first warning came from the outer monitoring stations at the edge of the solar system. Long-range sensors detected something massive moving through the darkness of space, but the readings made no sense. The objects were too big, too fast, and completely silent. Jun was in the palace command center reviewing supply reports when the emergency alarms began shrieking through the corridors. Queen Vera rushed in moments later, her forearms already reaching for weapons that weren't there. "What's the situation?" she demanded. The communications officer, a young alien named Kex, was pale with terror. "Your Majesty, the outer stations have gone silent one by one. Whatever destroyed them is heading directly for our homeworld." A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, showing the solar system with red dots marking the lost monitoring posts. The pattern was clear. Something was cutting a straight line toward the planet, destroying everything in its path. "How long until it reaches us?" June asked. 6 hours, maybe less," Kex replied, his voice shaking. Vera's antenna twitched with growing alarm. "Show me the last transmission from Station 7. The hologram shifted to display a grainy image from the destroyed outpost. For a moment, there was nothing but empty space and distant stars. Then something moved into view that made June's blood freeze. It wasn't a ship, in any sense he understood. The thing was easily the size of a small moon, but it was clearly artificial. Its surface was covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, and it moved with mechanical precision that spoke of intelligence without soul. "Void machines," Vera whispered, and every alien in the command center took a step backward. "What are void machines?" Jun asked, though the name alone filled him with dread. "Our ancient enemy," Vera replied, her voice hollow with old fear. "They destroyed our original homeworld 1,000 years ago. We thought they were gone, lost in the deep void between galaxies. They are not living creatures. They are pure artificial intelligence given form. They hate all organic life and seek to destroy it wherever they find it." The display showed more of the massive machines emerging from the darkness, dozens of them, each one large enough to carry weapons that could crack planets. "They choose now to return," Vera continued. "They must have detected the changes in our society, the weakness they perceive in our union." June stared at the display, his mind racing through possibilities. Traditional military thinking would be useless against enemies this large and advanced, but maybe that was exactly why they had returned now. They expected the same old tactics that had failed 1,000 years ago. "What are our military capabilities?" he asked. Admiral Nex, Vera's chief military advisor, stepped forward. "We have 300 warships, Your Majesty. Our largest battlecruiser is barely 1% the size of a single void machine." "And our traditional battle tactics?" "Formation flying, concentrated firepower, honor duels between commanders," Nex replied. "The same strategies our people have used for centuries." June nodded slowly. "The same strategies that failed against these machines before." "You have an idea," Vera said, recognizing the look in his eyes. "Maybe. On Earth we had a saying, when you can't win through strength, win through intelligence. These machines are designed to counter your traditional tactics, but they won't be prepared for something completely different." Jun moved to the tactical display and began manipulating the holographic controls. "They're expecting you to meet them in open space combat, ship to ship. They've probably run millions of calculations based on your historical battle patterns." "But," Vera prompted, "but what if we don't fight them the way they expect? What if we use tactics they've never encountered? Jun pulled up the planet's defensive grid. Your people think in terms of honor and direct confrontation. Humans think in terms of survival and winning at any cost. We use guerrilla warfare, psychological, operations, deception. Admiral Nex looked skeptical. These are machines, human. They have no psychology to manipulate. Every intelligent system has weaknesses, Jun countered. They just might not be the weaknesses you'd expect. Over the next 4 hours, Jun worked with Vera and her commanders to completely reshape their battle plans. Instead of meeting the void machines in glorious space combat, they would do something that went against every instinct of the warrior race. They would hide. Not from cowardice, but as part of a larger strategy that would turn the machines' own intelligence against them. Jun had noticed something in the old records of the original invasion. The void machines were perfectionist. They calculated every possible outcome and planned accordingly. But that also meant they had a weakness. They couldn't adapt quickly to completely unexpected situations. When the massive enemy fleet finally arrived in the system, they found exactly what they expected: a planet defended by traditional alien military formations. The machines began their calculated assault, using the same devastating tactics that had worked 1,000 years before. What they didn't expect was for the entire defensive fleet to suddenly scatter in all directions, abandoning formation and seemingly fleeing in panic. But it wasn't panic. It was the beginning of something the void machines had never encountered before: human-style asymmetric warfare, adapted for space combat and powered by alien technology. The real battle was about to begin, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the void machines were about to face something they couldn't predict or calculate. Jun smiled grimly as he watched the enemy fleet pause in confusion, their perfect calculations suddenly useless. "Now they're playing our game," he said. The scattered fleet ships weren't running away. They were taking positions that made no sense to the void machines' calculated minds. Jun watched from the command bridge of a small strike craft as the massive enemy vessels tried to reorganize their attack patterns to deal with targets that refused to follow predictable formations. "Phase 1 complete," he reported to Queen Vera, who was commanding the main battle group from her flagship. "The machines are confused. Their formation is spreading out to chase individual ships." "Excellent," Vera's voice crackled through the communication system. "Begin Phase 2. Jun's strike team consisted of the smallest, fastest ships in the fleet, vessels that the void machines had dismissed as insignificant threats. But these little ships carried something the ancient enemy had never encountered: human-designed computer viruses, adapted to work on alien technology. "Remember," Jun told his team over the radio, "we're not trying to destroy these things with weapons. We're trying to give them a digital disease." The strike craft dove toward the nearest void machine, weaving between energy blasts that could have vaporized a city. The massive enemy vessel's weapons tracked them, but the targeting systems were designed for large-scale fleet combat, not for swatting tiny, erratically moving targets. Jun's ship reached the machine's hull and deployed its special payload, not explosives, but a swarm of tiny devices that burrowed into the enemy's communication networks like digital parasites. "Virus deployed," Jun reported, moving to Target 2. All across the battlefield, other strike teams were doing the same thing. The void machines noticed the attacks, but couldn't understand their purpose. The tiny devices weren't doing any visible damage, so the machines' logical minds dismissed them as failed weapons. That was their first mistake. Within minutes, the virus began to spread through the machine's network. It wasn't designed to destroy their systems. That would have been impossible against such advanced technology. Instead, it did something much more subtle and devastating. It made them doubt themselves. The virus introduced tiny errors into the machine's calculations, making them second-guess their tactical decisions. It delayed their responses by fractions of a second. Most importantly, it made them start analyzing every possible threat instead of focusing on the most dangerous ones. "Jun, the machines are slowing down," Vera reported from her flagship. "Their response time is degrading." "Perfect," Jun replied. "Now we show them what happens when perfect machines face imperfect humans." Phase 3 began with something that had never been tried in space combat before: psychological warfare against artificial intelligence. Jun's team began broadcasting on all frequencies, not threats or demands, but something far more disturbing to the machine's logical minds. They transmitted pure chaos. Random numbers, contradictory orders, impossible mathematical equations, and fragments of human music and poetry. The Void Machine's advanced minds tried to analyze this flood of meaningless data, searching for hidden patterns or secret codes. They couldn't help themselves. Their programming demanded that they understand every potential threat, but there was nothing to understand. It was just noise designed to waste their processing power. As the machines struggled with information, overload and viral interference, Vera's main fleet struck with coordinated precision. But instead of attacking the enemy's weapons or engines, they targeted something much more crucial: the machine's communication arrays. Without their perfect network coordination, the massive Void Machines became isolated islands of artificial intelligence, each one forced to make decisions without the collective wisdom of the fleet. And that's when Jun played his final card. "All ships, execute the Trojan Horse Protocol," he commanded. Throughout the battlefield, damaged alien ships began broadcasting distress signals and drifting toward the Void Machines as if their engines had failed. The machines, following their programming to analyze and catalog everything, began pulling the disabled ships into their cargo bays for examination. Each of those ships carried a crew of volunteers and enough explosives to cripple a Void Machine from the inside. The explosions began simultaneously across the enemy fleet, not enough to destroy the massive vessels, but enough to damage their internal systems and create chaos within their hulls. "Now, Vera!" Jun shouted into his communicator. The Queen's flagship, along with the rest of the main fleet, emerged from behind the planet's largest moon where they had been hiding. Fresh, undamaged, and ready for battle, they struck the confused and wounded Void Machines with everything they had. The ancient enemy that had seemed invincible an hour ago was now fighting blind, confused, and divided. Their perfect calculations had been replaced with doubt and error. Their unified intelligence had been shattered into isolated fragments. One by one, the massive Void Machines began to fall. When the last enemy vessel finally went dark, the communication channels erupted, with cheers from across the fleet. They had done the impossible, defeated an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years, but Jun knew this victory meant something even more important than military success. "Open a channel to Earth," he told the communications officer. "Jun, what are you doing?" Vera asked. "Something that should have happened long ago," he replied. "Your Majesty, I'd like you to meet my people, and I'd like my people to meet yours." The conversation that followed would be remembered as the moment that changed everything. Two species that had never truly understood each other began to see what they could accomplish together. Jun had started this journey as a prisoner, about to be eaten alive. He was ending it as the bridge between two worlds, the architect of an alliance that would reshape the galaxy. As he looked out at the stars, holding one of Vera's hands in his own, Jun smiled. The universe was a big place, full of wonders and dangers they hadn't even imagined yet, but whatever came next, they would face it together.